How many calls do I have to make to buy a house? Now, this is a pretty loaded question, obviously. This will depend on how good you are on the phone, how willing you are to get out to these appointments, and what your level of skill is. If you take someone who has zero skill, then it's going to take a lot more calls for you to get a deal, but it will still be a great way for you to get a deal. Minimum, if you're not great at this, part of how you get great is for you to put yourself in the action, get yourself in the middle of things. This is how you get really good at real estate, really good at negotiating and talking with people. You got to go out and do. Right? We can't talk about in theory. We can't practice with our friends and role play until we're perfect. There's no better practice than actually getting in action. Now, if you can take the best situation is if you're role playing, you're out in real life practicing, making calls every day, and you're listening to all your recordings and reviewing them. If you do that, then I've seen people grow and turn into really amazing phone callers in just a few months, like really quickly. Now, I've also seen people do this for 5, 6 years and just suck at it because they're just not. They just want to practice in theory. They don't want to really get the practice in. They don't want anyone hearing their calls. They want to just create this environment where they think they're great, but they're really not because they're not willing to put that level of energy and commitment into it. But you can change who you are and go from being the worst on the phone to the best in just literally like the shortest period of time if you're willing to get in action, practice on your spare time, and then listen to your recordings so you can see what you're doing well, what you're doing not well, and keep improving. So how many calls do we have to make? Pretty important. I'm going to give you just a general idea, but you have to talk to about 100 people to find someone who's selling. So now when I say 100, that means that the Mojo Dollar has dialed 100 different phone numbers, and often of those 100 phone numbers, it's just not everyone's going to answer. So it will go through about 100 people to get someone who's actually selling. Now, from 300 people, you generally can set an appointment because probably 1 out of 3 people you talk to who are considering selling, maybe you're going to sell in a couple months or a year, one of those will be actually willing to allow you to come see their house. And those 300 people, you set one appointment. And you set 1 to 3 appointments, usually it'll turn into a contract. So the good news is if you're going out on plenty of appointments, you'll get deals. Now, again, this is a very skilled level that I'm giving you these numbers. If you're newer, you might have to go on 10 appointments. The key is that for yourself, figure out what your numbers are. Now, you don't want to make these numbers, okay, if I'm not following these, I suck. No, just figure out what your numbers are, because once you know what the math is, then you know that it takes me 2 hours a day, 5 days a week to get X amount of appointments. Once I get X amount of appointments, I'm able to close one deal a week. I tell the story of a realtor I used to work with that I know who did a great job. They would talk on the phone 2 hours a day. They would do cold calling, and from that 2 hours in the morning, they would set appointments in the afternoon, and from that, they would go on literally 1 to 2 appointments every day, and they would close a new listing or 2 every week. And literally, almost every, they were doing a couple a week, not just one a week. They were doing a couple, and they were doing 200 transactions a year with just 2 hours in the morning. We can do very similar with this. I'm not saying you're going to do 200 deals a year, but imagine if you just put an hour a day of cold calling, and your mission in that hour is to try to set a couple appointments a week. And then, over a month, those couple appointments turned into a deal or two. You now have a viable investment business. So now this is the third way I showed you that you can spend an hour a day, right? Really generating opportunities. But the key to all 3 of these is consistency, that you do it, you stick with it long enough to be able to master it and be able to make it work, because it won't always work when you first try it. You put a week into it, it's not going to be enough. Cold calling is very much like that also. One of our acquisitions guy who cold called for about 18 months, it took him a month or 2 to get his first deal, but he did it every day. Cold call, he stuck with it, very consistent. Eventually got his first deal. Now, his first year with us, he ended up getting about 11 deals total from cold calling, which was pretty sweet. And he was very new. He didn't know anything, and he's very basic. He was not great on the phone by any means, and he did get a lot better. He got a lot better quickly, though. He really evolved into an awesome person and a great salesperson and a lot of great skills. So this is something that anyone can do. You can go from being completely afraid like I was to this being a complete boss on the phone.